Welcome everybody. I'm Garry Adelman with the American Battlefield Trust out here at Gettysburg. I'm on East Cemetery Hill at Gettysburg, a key fighting component at this battle. I'm looking at a few things here. You can see the gatehouse of the Evergreen Cemetery. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about Winfield Scott Hancock and his statue and some of the other things you see up here on East Cemetery Hill. We are live on YouTube. We're usually live on Facebook, but we thought we would try this where just one person, in this case me, will go out and try to show you a battlefield. For those of you who don't get to come out here or can't see it often enough, we thought we would do this. Hit me with questions along the way or comments, and I'll do my best to read them while I'm looking at my smartphone and walking around. For those of you who don't know, the American Battlefield Trust, we save battlefields. We preserve the hallowed ground where people fought. And let's start to talk then about some of the stories of this famous battlefield here at Gettysburg. And I'll be shooting it mostly in this mode. You see a stone wall here. This stone was here in July of 1863 during the Battle of Gettysburg. That road over there was there at the time. Hello, Captain Chris Kirk. Good to have you here. These monuments weren't here. These trees weren't here, but we do have a lot here from the battle, namely the battleground itself. So let me just talk about this here. I'm now standing on a plot that was the first preserved battlefield land at Gettysburg. These 4 acres, along with those demaloon-shaped cannon protectors called lunettes, were the first things preserved at Gettysburg. From this sprung out the 8,000 acres of the Gettysburg National Military Park over here. Now, as I look out in this direction, I am looking northwest, beyond the town of Gettysburg and out toward the seminary. Some of you might be able, let's see if I can zoom in here on this. Let's see if it works. On the seminary cupola that you can see right there. There's another steeple next to it on the seminary campus. That is the oldest active Lutheran seminary in the country. And hello to everybody, and hello to my friends at the American Battlefield Trust who are now on. That is where the first day of the battle is going to take place. So the Battle of Gettysburg lasts 3 days, July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, 1863. On the first day, they're going to struggle north and west of town. Who's struggling? Well, it's the North against the South, the Yankees against the Rebs, the Federals against the Graycoats, the Bluecoats against the Confederates, the Union against the Confederacy. This is this 3-day battle at Gettysburg in July of 1863. And on the first day, out north and west of town, the Southerners win a huge victory where a portion of their army, 30,000 soldiers, will smash 20,000 Union troops who will retreat back through town to this hill here, Cemetery Hill, ultimately occupying that hill over there, also called Culp's Hill. Now, when they came back here, there were some cannons waiting for them, some troops that had been placed here by a guy named Oliver Otis Howard. He's in command of the Union 11th Corps, and when he sent his troops out to fight north of town at Gettysburg, he was smart to have left some Union infantry and artillery. That's the foot soldiers. Those are the cannons back here on Cemetery Hill, this portion of Cemetery Hill itself being called East Cemetery Hill. While the troops were streaming back, the Union in a terrible retreat back through town, Winfield Scott Hancock, whose monument you see here, was seen, steadying the troops. That's what he's doing here on this monument. Calm down here. We got this. Don't worry about it. We're going to form a new line. He helped to steady the troops. He also helped to post some of the troops over there on Culp's Hill. So when the Confederates came in after their victory, they captured the town of Gettysburg. Not something that happened a lot in the Civil War. Most of the Civil Wars, of course, fought in the South. And, Hancock is shown giving that steady leadership that, we've all met people like that before. That person who you would naturally flock to for leadership. Hancock was one of those guys here. He could walk onto a battlefield supposedly in civilian clothes and actually command troops. Let's see, was there any men from the town of Gettysburg that fought for the Confederacy? Yes, as a matter of fact. I didn't catch your name, whoever left that question, but let me just hit them as I go. So you've got a couple. There's a guy named Wentz who fights on the second part of on the second day's field, and a guy named, more famously, Wesley Culp. Both of them were carriage makers, and they took their trade somewhere to the south, one to Louisiana, one to Virginia, and they both ended up coming back to their hometown to fight. Wesley Culp will be killed here, but not on his uncle's or his family land. John Wentz, I believe his name, his dad Henry, is here during the battle, is told his son has been wounded at Gettysburg, but won't go to see him. He was that mad that his son had fought for the other side. Keep hitting us with your questions. I'm Garry Adelman with the American Battlefield Trust, and you're watching an American Battlefield Trust YouTube live video. We're at Gettysburg. We're on Cemetery Hill, and we'll be talking for a little while about some of the fighting and about some of the battlefield actually up here. This is one of our Battlefield live videos. So let me go back to first-person shooter mode. So Hancock is steadying those troops, you know, and he's the guy to do it. And the Union will ultimately come up with a pretty strong line here up at Cemetery Hill here. And here's the important part. You know, the Confederates want to follow up their retreating foe, but then the Union has a bunch of cannons over here frowning down upon them. They've got a strong line of infantry. The Confederates had just fought a horrible battle that day. July 1st, 1863 is the 12th largest battle of the Civil War, bloodiest at least, with more than 18,000 casualties had it ended just on the first day, and there's still 2 more terrible days to go. So the idea that Lee could have continued to attack, Robert E. Lee, of course, in command of the Confederate forces here, that he just could have continued the attack is just not reasonable. They fought one of the biggest, bloodiest days of the whole Civil War, probably one of the top 6 bloodiest single days of the Civil War, up there with, you know, the Battle of Antietam, the 2nd day at Gettysburg, the 3rd day at Chancellorsville, and other days, maybe like September 20th at Chickamauga, when there's more than 15,000 casualties being killed, wounded, captured, or missing along the way. So the first day was a real deal fight, and if the Gettysburg movie or the Ken Burns series do anything wrong, it's to minimize the impact and bloody nature of the first day. It was a huge battle. Now, a few of you all are saying, you know, you wish you were here. That's one of the reasons we do these. I hope you do come here. I hope you help us to preserve battlefields, and I hope you come to these battlefields. But if you can't, enjoy the next best things. Watch our videos at battlefields.org, or come to our YouTube lives or Battlefield lives and get to know these places and live vicariously through us, who have picked up and moved their entire families to places like this so that we could be closer to it. Let me walk up the hill a little bit and talk about a little bit of the history of this, because this is called Cemetery Hill, and like most cemetery hills around the country, there's lots around. It is named because there's a cemetery on a hill overlooking the town. This was formed in the 1850s, and about 7 years before the battle, this main edifice, the Evergreen Gateway, was actually erected here. So it was here during the battle. If you imagine taking off this right section over here, you'd get a good idea of what it looked like. It's probably the same color that it was at the time, but it might have been even redder or whatever. Somebody's asking whether there's any fighting between you know, one of the positions behind me here, a Confederate position called Benner's Hill, outlined by a little water tower you might be able to see in the distance over here, and the high school. The answer is yes. I'm going to get into some of that fighting. It depends on what you mean. So stick with me, stick with the video. That's your teaser there, and I'll take you along as we go. So this Evergreen Cemetery would have been the local town cemetery. Surely there were church cemeteries and other things around here, but this would have stood out on this hill, Cemetery Hill, as people came up the Baltimore Pike. 10 roads led into Gettysburg at the time of the Civil War, and it is just you know, it can't be stressed enough that that's why the battle is fought here. It's not fought over shoes like you might have heard or something. It's fought because the roads naturally brought the armies to this particular place, and this particular place happened to be great for Union soldiers to form a defensive position, going from Culp's Hill over there, around that location, and skirting around this hill, East Cemetery Hill, and then through what is now the National Cemetery, not the Evergreen Cemetery, but the National Cemetery. I'll talk about that later, I hope. Going around that hill and then down for 2.5 miles over to little hills in the distance. At least those you in Colorado and Montana and Wyoming would call them little hills, called Little Round Top and Big Round Top. It resembled a Fishhook here, and I'm glad you're you know, watching and commenting. Please continue to do so as we go along. Somebody said it's the hub of the wheel. Exactly. Gettysburg looks like a wagon wheel with the town at the spoke and the roads going off in every direction. Okay, so when people came up the Baltimore Pike, and this was one of the nicer roads here, it was made of crushed white limestone, they would come and see this main edifice. Wow, what a beautiful structure. And the early photographers at Gettysburg, the ones who came here in July of 1863, all came and photographed that structure. It's the most early photographed structure of the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, one of the things you see up here are a lot of cannons. These are actual Civil War cannon barrels mounted on replica iron carriages, and in this case, they are protected by these half-moon shaped or demi-lune shaped structures called lunettes. So you could see if they were a little bit taller, they were reinforced with wood, it would be a lot harder to hit the cannoneers if there's this thing covering everything but the muzzle of the gun. So these guns could have been in the Battle of Gettysburg. Maybe we'll take a look at one or two of these and see if it's possible. The carriages, not, because those are made of iron. They are reproduction carriages. Somebody's asking, I wonder if the Confederates had enough left after doing so much on the first day. Really good question, and one that people have been debating ever since. Let's see. This this looks like this is a 3-inch ordnance rifle. You can tell it's a sleek gun made entirely of wrought iron instead of some of the earlier models that had cast iron in them. The barrel was 816 pounds, hard to see from here, and it was made in 1864. So this gun couldn't have been at this battle, but numerous of these 3-inch ordnance rifles were around in the Battle of Gettysburg. So you can learn a lot about a cannon just by looking at it here, okay? So again, I am on Cemetery Hill, and you're with the American Battlefield Trust. You know, and we're trying to show you just some of the battlefield as we go. This is not like our other Facebook and YouTube live videos with numerous people. I'm doing this one on my own. So bear with me as I try to read your comments and take you around all at the same time around this beautiful site here. So after the first day of the battle, the Union took position up here. They've got cannons, they've got troops, and they bend around this hill like this, okay? Now, one thing that you realize is that it's not good to have troops in front of your cannons, because then the cannons can't really shoot. That is, unless you put the troops below the cannons, if they occupy not the crest, which is where these cannons are up here, but rather the military crest, where the cannons can still fire over your heads, and if you have to fall back, you're still on the hill. So the Union and the Confederacy would employ that at Gettysburg and at numerous other battlefields. Let's take a look at this and see how this actually plays out here. As you get to see, you know, that this is really a dominating position. You can see the big gully between East Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill off in the distance. Somebody's asking if we play War of Rights. Man, people love that game. If you're a gamer, you probably already know about War of Rights. If you're a gamer and don't know about it, you might want to check that out, and some of the other excellent board and video games that are out there here. So we're looking over here, and you could see it would do no good to have Union infantry right in front of these cannons. These cannons need to be able to fire over your head, so they would have put the infantry, and did, down at the base of the hill there. A little bit dangerous here, and let me tell you why in a second. So you got the infantry down there, Connecticut, New York, and other troops. These troops had been involved on the first day and were forced back through town. They were weak, and they were asked to man a line that was stronger than they could possibly man, meaning sometimes there were 6 feet between each soldier as they did this. The Union line actually ran through those trees and out past those water towers now. And just beyond them there, on land preserved by the American Battlefield Trust. So on the night of July 2nd, while the Confederates have already attacked in famous attacks, Little Round Top, Big Round Top, Devil's Den, the wheat field, the peach orchard, this fight is just getting underway as Louisianians come out from the town directly toward us here. And North Carolinians could be seen in the twilight. They could barely even see them swinging out through this position. When they did this, Union guns on a place called Stevens Knoll, you might be able to see that little rise on the edge of Culp's Hill right over there. They are going to decimate the North Carolinians under the command of a guy named Avery as they come through this field. But nonetheless, they wheeled into position and attacked the Union soldiers at the base of the hill before they even knew what was happening. The Yankees had no chance to be able to even see the Confederates, and then their weakened line in some places it held, such as the 17th Connecticut over there, and in other lines some of the New Yorkers broke. So the Confederates are literally breaking through here, while the Confederates over in this direction, the Louisianians under the command of Harry Hayes, push through, roll over the first Union line, and then the Union line takes position in what is now the edge of this tree line here. This was open at the time of the battle. They take position there, rolled over that position. The Union takes position behind these this stone wall here. The Union loses these 5 cannons under here under the command of a guy named Weidrich. The Southerners roll over this wall too, and they come up toward these guns as well. We're talking about Ricketts and maybe Reynolds and some other ones. So the Confederates capture 9 cannons. The Yankees are fighting them back with hand spikes and whatnot, and there's hand-to-hand combat up here. But Winfield Scott Hancock on this day is pretty far from here, a mile away or so, but recognizes from the sounds of battles and his experience that maybe things weren't going all that well. So he happened to send 2 brigades over into this vicinity, one of which arrived in time, and these Pennsylvania soldiers came in right at the critical moment, right as the Confederate plateau was cresting. The Southerners, almost captured the most important position at Gettysburg. They actually did, but could they hold on to it? Well, Hancock sends 2 brigades. The entire Confederate attack consisted of 2 brigades, and where are the Confederate reinforcements? There aren't any. That is the story of Gettysburg. The Southerners have 70,000 men at Gettysburg. The Union has 90 plus thousand men at Gettysburg, and wherever the Southerners attacked, they were at a disadvantage because the Union line, which resembled a fishhook, the Confederate line went around that fishhook. So the Confederate line was attenuated, it was stretched out, it was thinner, and wherever they attacked and achieved success, they were unable to really follow up on that success for lack of reinforcements. The Union fishhook allowed them to have reinforcements moving back and forth throughout, and their commander, George Gordon Meade, is going to use that to the fullest. And I'm glad you like my hat. Who is that over there? I couldn't quite see it without getting even more uncomfortably close to the camera, but I'm glad you like my hat. I got it in town at Dirty Billy's. This is the hat I wear on all my live events, if I can help it. Now I have a second one. Thanks for asking. You're with the American Battlefield Trust, and we're live from the Gettysburg battlefield. Let me go to this view here. So the Union ultimately pushes the Confederates off this hill. Hand-to-hand fighting. The Southerners give it up very reluctantly. Had the Union lost this hill, they would have had to leave Gettysburg. It's that simple. You cannot have Confederates on this hill and still hope to hold that hill and the other ridge here. You would be cut in two. It would be a horrible situation, and the Confederates could have in effect won this battle by capturing this hill at this night, but they simply lacked the reinforcements. And time and again at Gettysburg, the Union was simply unable to capitalize. The Confederacy was unable to capitalize on gains that it made here. Captain Kirk again also said, I have the coolest job in history. I kind of agree. I'm pretty lucky to be able to come out here and do this stuff, but it is exhausting. And I'll also that it took me 20 years to get my dream job. So, be prepared. If you want to try to knock me off and get my job from me, take a decade or two and then see if you can do that as you go. I'm just happy that you all are coming. I moved out here without a job 26 years ago, and, I've lived out here ever since, within an hour of Gettysburg, and I can just drive up here whenever, my schedule allows me to do it. But I remember what it was like when I lived in the Midwest, and it was a 13-hour drive to get out here, and I had to get back to work. So this is one of the reasons the Trust does this, so we can bring this to other people who don't get to come out here often. I'm going to take the opportunity to cross the street here. I'm crossing the Baltimore Pike, the town of Gettysburg, 2,400 people at the time. Now about 7,000 would be right down that way. And I'm leaving East Cemetery Hill here in my wake as I go, because I wanted to take you into not the Evergreen Cemetery, but rather the Soldiers National Cemetery. This is the first national cemetery ever established on a battlefield after a battle. There were some smaller ones established at hospitals and whatnot, and of course this is probably the most famous of the Civil War national cemeteries, competing along with Arlington, which is of course very much a Civil War cemetery, but now associated with other wars as well. This one, local people had this idea: let's take the Union dead, and let's be clear about it. This is an active Civil War. The idea of burying Union and Confederate soldiers together was just not thought of at the time. There was an active war going on. They were not going to bury them together. The Southerners remained in the ground at Gettysburg for about 8 years until we moved south by a Southern ladies group. As unidentified piles of bones, mostly. No dog tags in the Civil War. You have the Union wanting to organize their soldiers by state, and you see the little plots here. The bigger ones will be New York and Pennsylvania, the ones with the most people here and the ones who lost the most here. And the Gettysburg dead will be arranged in a semicircular fashion around a central monument that I'll show you shortly. I'm going to talk a little softer because we are going to walk into a cemetery here, and you could see early pictures of it. There's the central monument there, called the Soldiers National Monument, you see over there, and you can even see some of the graves going around there. Let's see, somebody asked, do I think the Confederates or the Union knew the significance of that battle at Gettysburg? The Yankees certainly claimed to. They were already calling it a major victory, and everything wouldn't be the same thereafter. The Confederates really never admitted that right away. They didn't want to admit that there was some sort of a turning point and the tide had shifted. And maybe a year later it didn't exactly look that way either, where the Confederates were holding off the Union pretty well. Here is the Soldiers National Monument rendering, so we'll go inside here and check some of this out. This is the most famous cemetery, not only because it's associated with the greatest battle of the Civil War, but because, of course, Abraham Lincoln would be invited to deliver a few appropriate remarks, and so he would here at Gettysburg. Before we get to the center, you can see here's a monument put up in the 1870s, actually, not long after the Civil War, to General John Fulton Reynolds, and the New York State Memorial is the tallest monument in the cemetery right here as well. So as we walk through here, just know that, Lincoln was the sideshow. I think you all know the story. You're going to have the main speaker be Edward Everett. He set the date. He said he couldn't be ready until November 19th, so they set that as the date. And then, not quite as an afterthought, but he wasn't part of the main deal. They invited the president, not sure if he would take it, but Lincoln accepted and chose to turn this into a call, to finish up the great task that had been started by others. And that's when he wrote and articulated his genius statement. It is not just my opinion or the opinion of the National Park Service or the people who run the Lincoln Memorial or anything like that, that this was a great speech. It, over time, became universal. And that happened, almost right away with Edward Everett, who was the greatest orator in America at the time, and wrote to Lincoln saying, "I flatter myself if I came as close to the central meaning of the occasion in 2 hours as you did in 2 minutes." And that's true. You could read their speeches side by side, and you see Lincoln making the same point in one sentence that Everett made in 30 sentences. No joke at all. By the way, the Gettysburg Address did not take part here because they were burying soldiers all in here. They are going to erect a platform above and in a blank spot in Evergreen Cemetery over there. And that is where the consecration of the Soldiers National Cemetery will actually take place. There, they would have blocked some of this off so that people, the 15,000 visitors, weren't standing on the fresh graves of the soldiers. The exhumation process actually, because soldiers are buried wherever they fell, and then moved here to their cemetery locations, in October of 1863, and then till the following March of 1864. So they erected the platform over there. You can almost picture the scene walking through here as you're going to have bands and dirges and a massive crowd throng in from the town of Gettysburg over there in toward this location. Before I picked that up, somebody asked, are these unmarked graves? Yes. So of the 3,513 soldiers who are here, 1,680 are either entirely or partly unknown. Like I said, no dog tags in the Civil War. So what we have here is in the unknown section, number 142. If you were to go to the park, they would have a list of what is known about the soldier who was buried in grave number 142. What did they find on that soldier? Were there buttons, but they couldn't tell what state they were from? Did they find a Bible, but it wasn't place specific? If we were to go into the cemetery, so let's do that just a little bit, you would see that at the head of every section here, you can see that this is an unknown section and how many remains are actually in it right here. But if we were to go over here, you can see some of the smaller state plots as we go. So you can see that Illinois, which only had some cavalry and one infantry unit here, has 6 soldiers buried here. Now that does not mean that there are only 6 soldiers from Illinois that died at Gettysburg. Rather, it means that there are only 6 here. Some people paid to have their loved ones taken home, and especially in the case of Pennsylvania, where it wasn't far to ship them. West Virginia, a brand new state here, and really only had 1 unit here fighting on East Cemetery Hill. The 7th West Virginia, I believe they are, will be out here. Now, sometimes you will come to these state plots, and it looks like all of these soldiers happily are identified. It looks like they've been recently repainted so you can read them a little bit easier, but in some cases they don't know all of it. So here we are in a different section. I didn't look and see which one, but they know the soldier's last name but not the first name. In other cases they might know the first and not the last, or they might know that that soldier was found with buttons from Massachusetts, but they don't know which soldier it was. Or they might know a unit but not the name, so they'll put on there as much as they can. But if they know which state the soldier was from, they will do their best to mark that as they go and put them in the right spot. There is the Soldiers National Monument. There are 4 figures on it: war, history, peace, and plenty, flanking the central column. And on top, of course, you have the figure of liberty and peace holding a laurel wreath, which is very common among these types of statues here. So right beyond this fence here, a fence that used to stand in Lafayette Park outside the White House in Washington, D.C., would be the actual speaker's stand there. You're going to have, like I said, a dirge, and you're going to have other people speaking here, and you're going to have, Edward Everett speaking here, and then there's a benediction, and Abraham Lincoln will get up. And a lot of people, there are several photographers here, and a lot of people just thought he would speak for longer than 2 minutes, but in this case, he was asked to deliver a few appropriate marks, and that's just what he did, and summarized what the nation was going through, what it was in right there, and the history of the nation, and what it needed to do next, the new birth of freedom. and what the government should be. And I don't need to tell you all about this. I highly recommend you learn more about it if you don't know a lot about it as it is. And Lincoln spent a total of 25 hours here. He stayed in town at the home of a guy named David Wills. He attended a political rally after this and a luncheon where he shook thousands of hands. People, newspapers back then would debate whether his speech was good or a total rag, but over time it would become so famous that local people, when they died in 1910, even 1920, the best thing they did in their life, what was most notable in their obituary, was that, you know, she was at the Gettysburg Address, or he was under the platform, or he shook Lincoln's hand when he came to Gettysburg. So there's just endless history to debate at Gettysburg and on these battlefields, and I really just encourage you to do this. If you're not already checking out America's battlefields, I know I'm biased. We're with the American Battlefield Trust. We save battlefields, but I hope you'll go to battlefields.org. I hope you'll look at the thousands of pages of content, videos, and articles that we have. We have videos for most states in the Civil War. Even if you don't think you're connected with specifically with Gettysburg or another place, I hope you'll go to our Facebook page and see our more than 100 live videos from the battlefield, and I hope you'll check more of these out on YouTube. Most of all, I appreciate anybody who checks out our website, goes to battlefields.org, and supports battlefield preservation. So thanks for watching today. I'll try to catch up on some of your questions and comments, and again, thank you for watching and thanks for your support.